After these rescued migrants made it to safety near Bear Valley, William Hook, Jacob Donner's stepson, broke into food stores and fatally gorged himself. The others continued to Sutter's Fort, where Virginia Reed wrote, "I really thought I had stepped over into paradise." She was amused to note one of the young men asked her to marry him, although she was only 12 years old and recovering from starvation, but she turned him down.
I would have.
12 years old. Will you marry me?
What? On March 1st, the second relief party arrived at Truckee Lake. Their rescuers included veteran mountain men, most notably John Turner, who accompanied the return of Reed and McCutcheon.
Almost a year, you guys. Jesus.
That is nuts.
Reed was reunited with his daughter Patty and his weakened son Tommy. An inspection of the Rain cabin found his occupants relatively well, but the Murphy cabin, according to author George Stewart, passed the limits of description and almost of imagination.
Sorry, I was thirsty. Lavina Murphy was caring for her 8-year-old son Simon and the 2 young children of William Eddy and Foster. She had deteriorated mentally and was nearly blind. The children were listless and had not been cleaned in days. Louis Kesberg had moved into the cabin and could barely move due to an injured leg. Ooh. That sounds just awful. Just awful.
Where? Oh, right there.
There.
No one at Turkey Lake had died during the interim between the departure of the first and the arrival of the second relief party. Patrick Brain documented a disturbing visit to the last week of February from Miss Murphy, who said her family was considered eating Milt Elliott. Reed and McCutcheon found Elliott's mutilated body.
Wow. That's crazy. The Alder Creek camp fared no better. The first 2 members of the relief party to reach it saw Trudeau carrying a human leg.
Yum.
Ew. When they made their presence known, he threw it into a hole in the snow that contained the mostly dismembered body of Jacob Donner. Okie dokie. Gross.
Inside the tent, Elizabeth Donner refused to eat, although her children were being nourished by their father's organs. The rescuers discovered 3 other bodies, but already been consumed in the other tent. Tamsin Donner was well, but George was very ill because the infection had reached his shoulder. So sore from his hand to his shoulder.
A superficial cut on his hand. Because he couldn't clean it properly.
Gangrene.
Ew.
Not enough nutrition either.
Well, yeah. Your body can't fight it off if there isn't proper vitamins. The second relief evacuated 17 migrants from Truckee Lake, only 3 of whom were adults. Both the Breen and Graves families prepared to go. Only 5 people remained at Truckee Lake: Kesberg, Mrs. Murphy, and her son Simon, and the young Eddy and Foster children. Tamsin Donner elected to stay with her ailing husband after Reed informed her that a third relief party would arrive soon. Mrs. Donner kept her daughters Eliza, Georgia, and Frances with her. I don't even know what to do.
The walk back to Bear Valley was very slow. At one point, Reed sent 2 men ahead to retrieve the first cache of food. Expecting the third relief, a small party led by Silliam E. Woodworth to come at any moment, a violent blizzard arose after they scaled the pass.
Well, 5-year-old Isaac Donner froze to death, and Reed nearly died. Mary Donner's feet were badly burned because they were so frostbitten that she did not realize she was sleeping with them in the fire. In the fire.
Jesus.
In, not next to, in the fire.
When the storm passed, the Breen and Graves family were too apathetic and exhausted to get up and move. Not having eaten for days, the relief party had no choice but to leave without them.
Oh, jeez. Imagine making it that long, but you can't move anymore, and now you're just left behind to die. That's crazy. 3 members of the relief party stayed, 1 at Truckee Lake and 2 at Alder Creek. When one, Nicholas Clark, went hunting, the other 2, Charles Cady and Charles Stone, made plans to return to California. According to Stewart, Tamsen Donner arranged for them to carry 3 of her children to California, perhaps for $500 cash. Oh.
Well, that was expensive back then.
Yeah, $500 a lot back then was like more. A lot more.
Cady and Stone took the children to Turkey Lake, but then left alone, overtaking Reed and the others within days. Several days later, Clark and Trudeau agreed to leave together. When they discovered the Donner girls at Truckee Lake, they returned to Alder Creek to inform Tamsen Donner.
William Foster and William Eddy, both survivors of the snowshoe party, started from Bear Valley to intercept Reed, taking with them a man named John Stark. After one day, they met Reed helping his children, all frostbitten and bleeding but alive.
Just desperate to rescue their own children, Foster and Eddy persuaded the 4 men with pleading and money to return to Truckee Lake with them. 11 survivors were huddled around a fire that had sunk into a pit.
Apparently I have a prescription ready. The relief party split with Foster, Eddy, and 2 others headed toward Truckee Lake. 2 rescuers, hoping to save the healthiest, each took a child and left. John Stark refused to leave the others. He picked up 2 children and all the provisions and assisted the 9 remaining Breens and Graves to Bear Valley.
Foster and Eddy finally arrived at Truckee Lake on March 14th, where they found their children dead. Kesberg told Eddy that he had eaten the remains of Eddy's son. Eddy swore to murder Kesenberg if they ever met in California.
Oh, but that's the needles for my diabetes thing. Where am I? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. George Donner and one of Jacob Donner's children were still alive at Alder Creek. Tamsen Donner had just arrived at the Murphy cabin. She could have walked out alone, but chose to return to her husband, even though she was informed that no other relief party was likely to be coming soon. Foster and Eddy and the rest of the 3rd Relief left with 4 children, Trudeau and Clark.
2 more relief parties were mustered to evacuate any adults who might still be alive. Both turned back before getting to Bear Valley, and no further attempts were made.
On April 10th, almost a month since the 3rd Relief had left Truckee Lake, the Alcalde near Sutter's Fort organized a salvage party to recover what they could of the Donner's belongings. These would be sold, with part of the proceeds used to support the orphan Donner children. Only part? Only part.
Let's see.
Yes, 100 count.
Okay. This salvage party found the Alder Creek tents empty except for the body of George Donner, who had died only days earlier. On their way back to Truckee Lake, they found Louis Kesberg alive. According to him, Miss Murphy had died a week after the departure of the 3rd Relief.
Jeez. Some weeks later, Tamsin Dunner had arrived at his cabin on her way over the pass, soaked and visibly upset. Kesberg said he put a blanket around her and told her to start out in the morning, but she died during the night. That's sad.
The salvage party was suspicious of Kensberg's story and found a pot full of human flesh in the cabin, along with George Donner's pistols, jewelry, and $250 in gold. The men threatened to lynch Kensberg, who confessed he had cashed $273 of the Donner's money at Tamsin's suggestion, so that it could one day benefit her children. Cachet.
It's cashed. It's not cachet, it's cash. It's just another way of spelling cash. It's also another definition, but we'll get into that later. On April 29th, 1847, Kesberg was the last member of the Donner Party to arrive at Sutter's Fort. So technically, it took until April. It took them a year.
News of the Donner Party's fate was spread eastward by Samuel Brennan, an elder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a journalist who ran into the salvage party as they came back from the pass with Kesberg.
Accounts of the ordeal first reached New York in July of 1847. Reporting on the event across the U.S. was heavily influenced by the national enthusiasm for westward migration. In some papers, news of the tragedy was buried in small paragraphs, despite the contemporary tendency to sensationalize stories. Ow.
Several newspapers, including those in California, wrote about the cannibalism in graphic, exaggerated detail. In some print accounts, the members of the Donner Party were depicted as heroes in California, a paradise worthy of significant sacrifices.
You're kidding me? I hate you right now.
I told you it was long.
Yeah, well, can't we break it up into... take breaks and shit? Sitting in one place is making my knees hurt. Immigration to the West decreased over the following years. Huh?
Oh, we don't have a lot of time.
They're talking under your breath.
I said I'll just start doing them by myself.
No, you won't. Immigration to the West decreased over the following years, but it is likely that the drop in numbers was caused more by fear over the outcome of the ongoing Mexican-American War than by the cautionary tale of the Donner Party.
In 1846, an estimated 15,000 people migrated to California. In 1847, the number dropped to 450 and then to 400 in 1848. The California gold rush spurred a sharp increase. However, 25,000 people went west. In 1849, most of the overland migration followed by the Carson River, but a few 49ers used the same route as the Donner Party and recorded descriptions about the site.
In late June of 1847, members of the Mormon Battalion under General Stephen Kearny buried the human remains and partially burned two of the cabins. The few who ventured over the pass in the next few years found bones, other artifacts, and the cabin used by the Reed and Graves family.
In 1891, a cache of money was found buried by the lake. It had probably been stored by Miss Graves, who hastily hid it when she left with the second relief so she could return for it later.
Lanesford Hastings received death threats. A migrant who crossed before the Donner Party confronted him about the difficulties they had encountered, reporting, of course he could say nothing, but that he was very sorry and that he meant well.
Of the 87 people who entered the Wasatch Mountains, 48 survived. Only the Reed and Breen families remained intact. The children of Jacob Donner, George Donner, and Franklin Graves were orphaned. William Eddy was alone. Most of the Murphy family had died. Only 3 mules reached California. The remaining animals perished. Most of the Donner Party's members' possessions were discarded.
A few of the widowed women remarried within months. Brides were scarce in California. The Reeds settled in San Jose, and 2 of the Donner children lived with them. Reed fared well in the California gold rush and became prosperous. Virginia wrote an extensive letter to her cousin in Illinois about our troubles getting to California, with editorial oversight from her father. Journalist Edwin Bryant carried it back in June of 1847, and it was printed in its entirety in the Illinois Journal on December 16, 1847, with some editorial alterations.
Virginia converted to
Catholicism,
fulfilling a promise she had made to herself while observing Patrick Breen pray in his cabin. The Murphy survivors lived in Marysville, California. The Breens made their way to San Juan Bautista, California, where they operated in. They became the anonymous subject of J. Ross Brown's story about his severe discomfort upon learning that he was staying with alleged cannibals, printed in Harper's Magazine in 1862. Many of the survivors encountered similar reactions.
That might at the very top there. George and Tamsin Donner's children were taken in by an older couple near Sutter's Fort. Eliza was 3 years old during the winter of 1846 to 1847, the youngest of the Donner children. She published an account of the Donner Party in 1911 based on printed accounts and those of her sisters. She wouldn't remember any of that.
Mm-hmm. The Breen's youngest daughter, Isabella, was a 1-year-old during the winter of 1846 to 1847, and the last survivor of the Donner Party. She died in 1935.
Jeez. Sorry, itchy ear.
The Graves.
The Graves children lived varied lives. Mary Graves married early, but her first husband was murdered. She cooked his killer's food while he was in prison to ensure the condemned man did not starve before his hanging. One of Mary's grandchildren noted she was very serious. Graves once said, "I wish I could cry, but I cannot. If I could forget the tragedy, perhaps I would know how to cry again." Mary's brother William did not settle down for any significant time. Interesting.
Nancy Graves was 9 years old during the winter of 1846 to 1847. She refused to acknowledge her involvement even when contacted by the historians interested in recording the most accurate versions of the episode. Nancy reportedly was unable to recover from her role in the cannibalism of her brother and mother.
Yeah, she had a freaking mental breakdown. Right. Eddie remarried and started a family in California. He attempted to follow through on his promise to murder Louis Kesberg, but was dissuaded by James Reed and Edwin Bryant. A year later, Eddie recalled his experiences to J. Edward Thornton, who wrote the earliest account of the episode, also using Reed's memories of his involvement. Eddie died in 1859.
Kesberg brought a defamation suit against several members of the Relief Party who accused him of murdering Tamsin Donner. The court awarded him $1 in damages, but also made him pay court costs.
$1 in damages? $1. Even back then, that was a shit amount of money.
And made him pay court costs.
Right. An 1847 story printed in the California Star described Kesberg's actions in ghoulish terms and his near lynching by the salvage party. It reported that he preferred eating human flesh over the cattle and horses that had become exposed in the spring thaw.
You imagine that.
Like, no, I'll finish off George over here and y'all can eat the animals. What the hell? Further. Wait, let me see. Which one did I just read? Yeah, you're here.
Historian Charles McLaughlin amazed enough materials to indict Katzenberg for the murder of Tamsin Donner, but also interviewing him, he concluded no murder occurred. Eliza Donner Houghton also believed Katzenberg to be innocent.
Ow. As Katzenberg grew older, he did not venture outside, but he had become a pariah and was often threatened. He told McLaughlin, "I often think that the Almighty has singled me out among all the men on the face of the earth in order to see how much hardship, suffering, and misery a human being can bear." Don't I know it?
Dinner Party episode has served as the basis of numerous works of history, fiction, drama, poetry, and film. The attention directed at the Donner Party is made possible by reliable accounts of what occurred according to Stewart, and the fact that cannibalism, although it might also be called a minor episode, has become, in the popular mind, the chief fact to be remembered about the Donner Party, for a taboo always allures with as great strength as it repels. The appeal is the events focused on families and ordinary people, according to Johnson, writing in 1996, instead of on rare individuals, and the events are a dreadful irony that hopes for prosperity, health, and new life in California, fertile valleys, led many only to misery, hunger, and death on her stony threshold.
The site of the cabins became a tourist attraction as early as 1854. In the 1800s, Charles McLaughlin began promoting the idea of a monument to mark the site of the Donner Party episode. He helped to acquire the land for a monument, and in June 1918, the statue of a pioneer family dedicated to Donner Party was placed on the spot where Breen-Katzenberg cabin was thought to have stood. It was made a California historical landmark in 1934. Whoa, man, just whoa.
The state of California created the Donner Memorial State Park in 1927. It originally consisted of 11 acres surrounding the monument. 20 years later, the site of the Murphy cabin was purchased and added to the park.
Oh. In 1962, the Immigrant Trail Museum was added to tell the history of westward migration into California. The Murphy Cabin and Donner Monument were established as a National Historic Landmark in 1963. A large rock served as the back end of the fireplace to the Murphy Cabin, and a bronze plaque had been affixed to the rock listing the members of the Donner Party, indicating who survived and who did not. The state of California justifies memorializing this site because the episode was an isolated and tragic incident of American history that has been transformed into a major folk epic.
It's not an isolated thing.
It's just one of the few that people actually got caught doing it.
Mm-hmm. As of 2003, the park is estimated to receive 200,000 visitors a year.
See, they're playing with his tail. Mm-hmm. Every time he moves his tail, she tries to get it. Mm-hmm. Most historians count 87 members of the party, although Stephen McCurdy in the Western Journal of Medicine includes Sarah Keyes, Margaret Reed's mother, and Luis and Salvador, bringing the number to 90. 5 people had already died before the party reached Truckee Lake. 1 from tuberculosis, Halloran, 3 from trauma, Snyder, Wolfinger, and Pike, and 1 from exposure, Hardcoop. So that takes it up to 95 people altogether. That's a lot of people. 95, it's right up there with 100. Oh, you're on the first.
Okay. A further 34 died between December 1846 and April 1847. 25 males and 9 females. Several historians and other authorities have studied the mortalities to determine what factors may have after It may affect survival in nutritionally deprived individuals.
Of the 15 members of the snowshoe party, 8 of the 10 men who had set out died. Stanton, Dolan, Graves, Murphy, Antonio, Fosdick, Luis, and Salvador. But all 5 women survived. A professor at the University of Washington stated that the Donner Party episode is a case study of demographically mediated natural selection in action. Wow. Natural selection. Well, you died, so we're going to eat you.
The deaths at the Turkey Lake, Alder Creek, and in the Snowshoe Party were probably caused by a combination of extended malnutrition, overwork, and exposure to cold. Several members became more susceptible to infection due to starvation, such as George Donner, but the 3 most significant factors in survival were age, sex, and the size of family group that each member traveled with.
Survivors were on average 7.5 years younger than those who died. Children aged between 6 and 14 had a much higher survival rate than infants and children under the age of 6, of whom 62.5% died, including the son born to the Kespers on the trail, or adults over the age of 35.
Oh, so that ill infant died.
So I would have died.
No adults over the age of 49 survived. Deaths were extremely high among males aged between 20 and 39 at more than 66%.
Whoa. Men have been found to metabolize protein faster, and women do not require as high a caloric intake. Women also store more body fat, which delays the effects of physical degradation caused by starvation and overwork. Men also tend to take on more dangerous tasks, and in this particular instance, the men were required to clear brush and engage in heavy labor before reaching Truckee Lake, adding to their physical debilitation. Makes sense. Back then, anyway. I still want to die. Ow!
Those traveling with family members had a higher survival rate than bachelor males, possibly because family members were readily shared food with each other, and also you could eat your family member.
Hermione, you little shit. She jumped on my foot.
Good girl.
Shut up.
I'm mad at you. Let's go.
We're going to talk about this afterwards. Although some survivors disputed the accounts of cannibalism, Charles McGlashan, who corresponded with many of the survivors over a 40-year period, documented many recollections that it occurred. Some correspondents were not forthcoming, approaching their participation with shame, but others eventually spoke about it freely.
McGlashan, in his 1879 book, History of the Donner Party, declined to include some of the most morbid details, such as the suffering of the children and infants before death, or how Miss Murphy, according to George Donner, gave up, lay down on her bed and faced the wall when the last of the children left in the third relief. He also neglected to mention any cannibalism at Alder Creek.
The same year McGlashan's book was published, Georgia Donner wrote to him to clarify some points, saying that human flesh was prepared for people in both tents in Alder Creek, but to her recollection, she was 4 years old during the winter of 1846 to 1847. It was only given to the youngest children. Father was crying and did not look at us the entire time, and we little ones felt we could not help it. There was nothing else. She also remembered that Elizabeth Donner, Jacob's wife, announced one morning that she had cooked the arm of Samuel Schumacher, 25-year-old teamster.
Yummy.
Could have just said, I have food.
Right. Eliza Donner Houghton, in her 1911 account of the ordeal, did not mention any cannibalism in Alder Creek.
Maybe that's because as such a youngin' she didn't want to understand.
Well, that, and you don't want to talk about it. It's very taboo.
And gross. Right?
You get what you get.
I'm just saying, I would really have to be close to death to be able to eat a human being, I think. Archaeological findings at the Alder Creek camp proved inconclusive for evidence of cannibalism. None of the bones tested at the Alder Creek cooking hearth could be identified with certainty as human. According to Rarick, only cooked bones could be preserved, and it is unlikely that the Donner Party members would have needed to cook human bones.
Eliza Farnham's 1856 account of the Donner Party was based largely on an interview by Margaret Breen. Her version details the ordeals of the Graves and Breen families after James Reed and the Second Relief left them in the snow pit. According to Farnham, 7-year-old Mary Donner suggested to the others that they should eat Isaac Donner, Franklin Graves Jr., and Elizabeth Graves because the Donners had already begun eating the others at Alder Creek, including Mary's father, Jacob.
Margaret Breen insisted that she and her family did not cannibalize the dead, but Christian Johnson, Ethan Rarick, and Joseph King, whose account is sympathetic to the Breen family, do not consider it credible that the Breens, who had been without food for 9 days, would have been able to survive without eating human flesh. King suggests Farnham included this in her account independently of Margaret Breen. Well,
according to an account published by H.A. Wise in 1847, Jean-Baptiste Tredu boasted of his own heroism, but also spoke in lurid detail of eating Jacob Donner and said he had eaten a baby raw.
That's disgusting. Let's just make it worse. Yeah, ew. Ugh. Many years later, Trudeau met Eliza Donner Houghton and denied cannibalizing anyone. He reiterated this in an interview. I lost my place. Oh, right. With the St. Louis newspaper in 1891 when he was 60 years old. Houghton and the other Donner Party children were fond of Trudeau and he of them, despite their circumstances and the fact that he had eventually left Tamsin Donner alone. Interesting.
Author George Stewart considered Trudeau's accounting to Wise more accurate than what he had told Houghton in 1884 and asserted that he deserted the Donners. Kirsten Johnson, on the other hand, attributed Trudeau's interview with Wise to be a result of common adolescent desires to be the center of attention and to shock one